Grab a cup of coffee and start your Sunday with Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Every Sunday morning at 9 on the Talk of New York, AM 970, The Apple. Visit cyacyl.com.
Hi, this is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is best-selling author and master storyteller Debbie Macomber. Debbie is a literary powerhouse with over 100 million books in print. She is the author of 20 Wishes, Back on Blossom Street, Between Friends, and the Cedar Cove series. Recently, the latest in her Cedar Cove series ranked #1 on the New York Times, USA Today, and Publisher Weekly bestsellers lists. Her newest book is entitled One Simple Act. Debbie, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, good morning to you, too.
I just finished reading One Simple Act, and it is a beautifully written collection of heartwarming stories. It just really touched my heart. I knew I was in a lot of trouble at the end of the first chapter after reading Kate's story, when you wrote that Kate said a prayer to God to watch over her son and comfort the mother of the homeless man. And I started to cry, and I just knew that I was going to be in for it with this book. Before we talk about One Simple Act, let's get into a little bit about your career. When did you first know that you wanted to be a writer?
I think I was a kid. I know for sure I started writing my first book when I was 10 years old. There's a great story that I tell about the first time somebody handed me a book. I was in the library in Yakima, Washington. I grew up in Yakima. And I was 4 years old, and my mom took me to the library for the first time for story hour. And she told me that when the librarian handed me the book, I grabbed hold of it with both hands and put it right next to my heart. And she said that from that moment forward, I would not go down for a nap or go to bed without a book in my hands. I'm still that way today. And that librarian was Beverly Clary, who is a well-known children's author now.
But you had to overcome some great challenges. You were dyslexic, and how were you able to accomplish that?
You know, I think and I tell this to people who are dyslexic and students, you know, that are dyslexic, that when we have a disability in one area, we are often compensated in another area by a talent. Mm-hmm. And we just need to find that talent. And with me, it was storytelling. I am a storyteller. My grandfather was a storyteller, and my father too. And I'm sure, and both of them were dyslexic, although they didn't know it at the time. I didn't know it until my own children were diagnosed with dyslexia. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of grew up being at the bottom of my class. My dad always thought he was dumb, and he never criticized me for being at the bottom of my class. Always very encouraging to me because he had gone through that same stigma himself. And but I wanted to tell stories, not the way my grandfather and my father did. I wanted to write them down. And I started writing when I was 10. And I wrote on a spiral-bound notebook. I wrote my first book, or started my first book. But when you are, you know, when you have troubles in school and you don't do well, it's very easy to push those dreams into the future and think someday. Well, someday caught up with me when I had a cousin that I was very close to who died of leukemia. And at one point, I tell this story a lot at writers' conferences, but it's applicable to anybody at any time in their lives. And I was lost in the hospital, and I couldn't find my way. And I asked the doctor, how do I get from here to there? And he said, it's very easy. Just go down the hallway, take a right, go all the way to the end of the corridor, and walk through the doors marked, absolutely no admittance. And I think that's what many of us have to do when we pursue our dreams. And that's what I did. After David died, I told my husband, I really want to write books. And this is a leap of faith for him, too, because it was about time for me to look for a job outside of the home. But we rented a typewriter. I put it on the kitchen table. I moved it at meal times. I can actually remember bouncing my 3-year-old on my hip and typing with one finger because I knew if I didn't get this thought down, I was going to lose it. Mm-hmm. And it took me 5 years to solve that first book. 5 very hard years.
And that brings me to 100 million books in print. And when you entered a contest with one of your manuscripts, one of the judges actually told you to throw the manuscript out. How did you get over that? And tell us what happened to that manuscript.
Oh, yes. I don't think I will ever forget that. By being a writer, I was taking $100 a month out of our family budget. And we were one family income. Wayne was a construction electrician, so we couldn't count on him working 12 months a year. If he averaged out 9 months, we were doing well. And he had gone through a period of unemployment, and it was bleak times. But I had signed up for this writers' conference, and they had agreed. They had 2 editors there. You know, meeting an editor is like an audience with the Pope.
Right.
This is big. And they had agreed to review 10 manuscripts, and mine was one of them. I was so excited. But then she got up, and there was this huge auditorium filled with writers. Any one of us would have given our right arm to be published. And she said one of the manuscripts she had reviewed showed promise. Well, I'd been writing for 5 years. I loved this story. I thought if I was ever going to sell it was with this story. It wasn't mine. In fact, she had the whole room laughing at what she called the infeasibility of my plot. Now, she could have said anything she wanted to about my writing. I knew I had to learn to be a writer, but I'm a good storyteller. She could have said anything about the writing. But afterwards, I thought, you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to do what they think is right if you want to sell. Be willing to revise. So I went up to her, and I told her what the name of my manuscript and asked her if I rewrote it, would she be willing to look at it again? And, oh, my goodness, I think how many years ago that was now, I can't remember, but I will never forget the look in her eye as she leaned forward and she put her hand in my arm and she said to me, "Throw it away." 5 years. 5 years. And I didn't even go to bed that night. I stayed up all night. I sat up all night in the shadows of dawn. Of course, having a creative imagination is not always a good thing because I was thinking all those ugly, negative voices of my youth. Debbie's a nice little girl, but she's never going to do well. Sit in the back of the class, honey. Stay after school. We want you to do a special reading group. It was just awful. It was those ugly voices. And I thought, well, okay, I'd started to sell in the children's market. I had sold a bunch of articles. I thought, well, maybe I'm just supposed to be writing for kids. So I attended a class on writing for kids. And the author got up and said, "Don't leave a rejected manuscript on your desk." And I thought, by golly, I'm not going to. I am not going to. I'm going to send out that manuscript. So I wrote a query letter to another publisher and sent it out. And then every day I waited. And if I've ever seen God's hand in my life, and I have many times, this is probably the most profound moment. I decided one day I couldn't stand to listen to those ugly voices because every time I looked at the manuscript, that's what I saw. I thought, I'm going to mail that off. I don't care if they want to see it or not because I'm not looking at it another minute. So I picked up the manuscript, loaded the kids in the car, and drove to the grocery store. Well, as it happened, Wayne was out of work. He was up in Alaska waiting to go out on the pipeline. And I was living with the kids on his unemployment check of $150 a week. And it was $10 to mail that manuscript. And I have to tell you that I could hardly give that money away. Joe and I just could hardly give that money to that. And the postmaster said, "You have to let go of the money. Let go." So I gave him the money. My stomach's in knots. We get home, and my son ran down to get the mail. And he said, Mom, that letter you've been waiting for is here." I opened it up. And across my query letter, in a Sharpie pen, the editor wrote, "Do not mail us your manuscript. We are not buying." I lay down the Davenport. I didn't move the rest of the day. 3 weeks later, they called and they bought the book. 3 weeks later, if I had waited a half hour, I would never have mailed it.
Now, Debbie, what keeps running through my mind is in your book, you talk about the importance of encouraging words, and I'm thinking about what that editor said to you and how you were able to overcome it. But just imagine how many people that editor, how many lives she could have destroyed with those words, that people would not have had the fortitude to go on the way that you did. They would have just given up. And that's why it is so important what you say to encourage people to be careful with our words, kindness. And,
Yes,
and that's just what keeps going through my mind after reading your book.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. There's a wonderful story in there about my grandson and just what encouraging words that he got from a general talking to an 8-year-old boy. My grandson had set up his little green army men in battle formation and had his mother take a picture of it in case she ever met a general. Well, it just so happened Jenny and I were in New York, and we ran into a general who's the husband of a friend of mine. And so she whipped out the picture, and she said, I want to be able to tell my son that I showed you this picture. And he didn't just look at it and say, oh, very nice. He took the picture, and he wrote Cameron a letter. And in the letter, he said, Cameron, I studied your battle plan. It is a good battle plan. And with your permission, I'm going to share it with my friends at the Pentagon. Now, what that did for that 8-year-old boy who has dyslexia and is struggling to read in school is we will never probably know, but how it lifted his spirits, how he brought that letter to his teacher, had her read it in front of the class. Those simple words of encouragement just lifted his head higher. I will always be grateful to General Rogers for that.
And those are the things that we don't see. And to just, because I know that you speak so often about God's hand in things, but I actually experienced something similar to that about a month and a half ago. I was having one of my moments of doubt, does my work mean anything? And, the whole thing, the whole pity party moment. And I received a message on Facebook from a woman that I had gone to high school with whom I have not been in contact probably in about 30 years. And she wrote to tell me that she was going through a very difficult time in her life and that one of my interviews was exactly what she needed. And she was writing to me just in case I was having a less than stellar week. And,
oh, my goodness.
And that's what I said right there. That woman, a few minutes of her time, gave me exactly what I needed at that moment. And that is what your book is about. One simple act. And Debbie, if you could tell us, this book is different from the type of work that you usually do. And what made you write this book?
It's kind of a funny story. I was in the Newark airport waiting for an early morning flight for Seattle. In fact, I was so early that the Starbucks hadn't even opened up, so I was one of the first people in line. And by the time they opened up, the line went around the corner. I mean, it was a really long line. I got my coffee, got to the gate, put my purse, my carry-on, my knitting, and my coffee spilled. First of all, I was really embarrassed because I had to clean up this mess. But somebody in line, of course, I didn't want to go stand back in that line because it was huge. Somebody in line saw what had happened and bought me a cup of coffee. Very simple thing. And they brought me the coffee, and they said, everybody needs their coffee in the morning. And I was so touched by that all the flight home, I kept thinking about how easy it is just to write a check. And it's important for us to be generous with our money, but there are other ways to be generous, and that's what we need to do. And how simple words, like you just saying, the words that your former high school classmate gave you, how those encouraged you, how important those words were to you, how important our words are to others. And other ways, hospitality, in caretaking. At the end of their lives, my parents needed constant care, and we ended up moving my parents, and it's the things that we do that are generosity of spirit more than generosity with money.
Debbie, we're going to let our listeners think about that for a moment while we take a break. This is Joan Herman. We'll be right back. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life now has a monthly free digital magazine that can be mailed to your inbox or read online at cyacyl.com. Each month, nationally recognized leaders in their fields, such as Joel Osteen, Shaun T., Tanya Brown, Ed and Deb Shapiro, Food Network's Robert Irvine, plus many others, provide the tools that you need to inspire and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Take the wisdom provided in the publication and apply it to your everyday life. Visit cyacyl.com for more information or to begin your free subscription. That's cyacyl.com. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is best-selling author and master storyteller Debbie Macomber. Debbie is a literary powerhouse with over 100 million books in print. Her newest book is entitled One Simple Act. Debbie, before break, we were talking about the importance of kindness and generosity. But even for those people who may be, who don't like to go for what they may write off as touchy-feely, you say that there is scientific data showing that generosity benefits the giver with amazing health benefits. How can being grateful and generous actually impact our health?
It's an attitude. It's what our attitude does for us. When we are open and generous to others, there's scientific proof shows that we benefit in the same way that when we exercise, our body benefits. Well, when we are generous and have a spirit of generosity in our lives, our bodies actually benefit from this. Our emotional health benefits from this. So, and this is probably a law, some kind of earth law, I guess you would call it, that when you give, you receive. And it goes back right to that.
And you also write about the importance of forgiveness and that it being so powerful. And you shared a story about Corrie ten Boom, who was a Nazi prisoner. Can you tell us a little bit about that powerful story and why it inspired you so much?
Oh, this is a wonderful story, and it comes from a book called The Hiding Place, which is probably one of my life books. I mean, I could read this book every year. It's such a powerful story of forgiveness. Corrie ten Boom was in a concentration camp, and there were fleas, and her sister said, you need to be grateful for everything. And she said, I can be grateful for everything, no matter what, but I can't be grateful for the fleas. Well, later they learned that the reason that they were not beaten was because, or terrorized by the guards, raped and everything else, was because of the fleas. The guards didn't want to get the fleas. So God used the fleas as their protection, and when she realized that, she could be grateful for the fleas.
And then what happened later on when she came face to face with one of her captors, one of the guards?
Oh my goodness, I did chills with that. She is giving lectures, and she lectured all over the world about her experiences in the concentration camp. And she came face to face with one of the most coolest guards there, a man who had terrorized her sister, and her sister died. And here he was, and her heart just rose to think that this man, and she could hate him for what he'd done, could hate him. And he came up to her afterwards and held his hand out to her and said, I'm sorry. And she had that moment of choice. She could hate him or she could forgive him. And she decided with God's help she would forgive him. And she said, I forgive you. And it was a turning point for her in her life. And she was free. And that's what forgiveness does. It frees us. And it's such a powerful story.
Debbie, you quote scripture throughout this book, and you share your faith with your readers. What role has your faith played in your work, and do you feel that you're on some type of mission through your written word?
I absolutely feel like I'm on a mission. I write books with purpose. In my office, I have a stairway that goes up to where I write, and I have author signatures, and I've collected these very specifically. These are authors whose stories have touched my life. I have Ernest Hemingway and Mark Twain, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Pearl Buck, and these are their words are so powerful. Did you know that in a Good Earth Pearl Buck story that that book changed foreign policy between China and the United States? So when I write a book, I do it with purpose, and I learned this lesson early because I have so many story ideas. I'm a storyteller. Everything that happens to me is a story. I can see a story in it. A friend was telling me just the other day she was going through this terrible divorce, and she said, I'll be free on Friday. And I just thought, oh, my goodness, free by Friday. What a great story idea. So I had to come up with the means of developing a story with purpose. So I came up with words because I'm a writer, and words are important to me. So the story, first of all, has to be provocative. I want my readers to think. You mentioned the book 20 Wishes. If you had 20 wishes, what would they be? Or the book that's going to be coming out next month is a hardcover called A Turn in the Road. If you were going to make a cross-country trip with two other people, who would they be and where would you go? I mean, I want them to think. I want to provoke their thoughts. The story has to be relevant to my readers' lives. If they're making a decision, what would they do with this decision? And a situation that could put the reader right into the story. the premise would have to do that. It has to be honest, and by that I mean realistic. I can't just make something up at the end of the book that's completely unbelievable. It has to be realistic. It has to be told in the most creative way possible. And often that includes where you start the story and where you end the story, or how you tell the story, from whose viewpoint is told. It has to be entertaining. So I'm not going to hit people over the head with my message, but I want there always to be a message in every book. So, but it has to be entertaining. It has to. My goal as a writer is for someone to say, I couldn't put that book down. I loved every word. And so I write books with purpose, and that's important to me.
Debbie, if you could summarize before we run out of time, what is the message that you want your readers and our listeners to walk away with regarding simple acts of kindness and generosity?
Well, with one simple act, I want people to think about paying it forward, about opening up their hearts, their lives, their spirits to being generous. If it means nothing more than meeting somebody's eye, making eye contact and smiling, looking at the homeless. I was in New York this earlier part of the week, and looking at the homeless, I made a point of looking at every single one of them and smiling. And I was affected by it. And then just in simple ways that we have of touching lives, inviting somebody over for dinner. Oh, we get so hung up on having the perfectly, clean house, having a great menu. We think, oh, maybe we should have it catered, bring in flowers. Just having somebody over for dinner, they don't care. They don't even care what you're serving. It's just the time together. Writing somebody a letter and just saying, I'm thinking of you. Or putting a note in your child's lunchbox, it's just very easy things. Somebody was telling me about they put money in at the laundromat so the next person coming in has a free load of wash.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, I just finished the book, and I highly recommend it. It is an easy read. It is beautifully written. The stories are heartwarming, and there are lessons to be learned throughout the book. So, Debbie, where can our listeners go to get more information about you and your work?
They can log on to my website, which is debbiemacomber.com, and it's BBIE, and Macomber is Macomber. But there are so many ways to find me. I'm on Facebook. I have a free phone app, so you can, I'm everywhere.
And as always, our listeners can get more information at our website, which is cyacyl.com, which stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our website, please read our digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, listen to past shows as podcasts, and follow the show on Facebook. Debbie, it was, as I said, such a pleasure for me to have you here today. I absolutely loved your book, and I would like to leave our listeners with a thought from Debbie's book. What is the most effective technique for transforming a life? Just be a little kinder. Thanks again, Debbie. This is Joan Herman, and this is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Thanks for tuning in.